When you hear the word accountability, what does it trigger in you? What does it make you think?
First and foremost, it triggers your own sense of morality, your own sense of right and wrong. So accountability for me is, am I doing what I know to be right? Then there's accountable to others. And that's where we're talking about the people that you journey with and the people that you go to for advice and guidance. There are times when you feel like you don't have the answers. And at this point, you must have another resource. It's almost like another gear in your car. You know, you're from first gear, you've gone to second gear, you've gone to third gear, you still ain't got the thing. Right? We're not, you know that the car's not moving in the way it's supposed to be moving until you change something.
Yeah.
Until you do something differently. And that doing something differently might mean instead of thinking, you now have to listen and you have to wait.
Okay. Yo, this is Aaron of Kong, and I want to talk to you about accountability. Okay, Internet, what's the definition of community?
Here's the definition of community. A group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common.
What do you consider to be your community? Perhaps it's the people that live on your street or in your apartment building. Is it the people that you pray with and attend a place of worship? Maybe it's an academic community or those that share a particular niche group of interests. Perhaps even in this age of the internet and connectivity, you consider yourself part of the global community. Are you benefiting from being a part of it? If so, do you hold yourself accountable for its progression, or are you happy to go solo and only look after yourself and those immediately close to you? I hadn't initially factored community into these conversations on accountability, but when I got the chance to sit down and chat with my mentor and community leader, Paul Reid, aka Brother Pablo, what happened needed its own episode. I initially thought it would inform the other chapters of creativity, health, family relationships, and love, and it did, but more specifically, it opened up the need for a conversation about leadership and development in community. Positive forces which have supported me to this point and ultimately the impetus to write and record this podcast. This chat happened on a sunny winter's day in Brixton, South London, just days before Christmas. Yes, we are here in the New Initiatives building, the site of Origin, an amazing program that I've been a part of as a youngster and benefited from. And I'm here with an elder of mine and a great mentor, Pablo. And thank you for joining me and talking to me.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, appreciate that. Pablo, perhaps you could introduce or just explain what Origin is and what you consider your work to be.
Okay. Well, Origin is an African-centered rites of passage program, as you know, as you well know, that supports young people in their transition to adulthood. And it works with young people within the context of their families and communities as we transition from being a child to becoming a young man. That work has been going on now for 20 years. The Origin program has been running for 20 years. This is its 20th year. For work that begun in this building, the kind of golden thread that started in 1988. So it's a good wow. I can see your eyes now working out. How many years? And doesn't he still look good?
Can't be true. Well, I was actually excited about the idea of a golden thread. I think we're going to come back to that motif as we talk. So you said the transition bit from boyhood to manhood or from childhood to adulthood. When does that happen? When does someone become a man?
Well, overnight, obviously. I mean, even at my big old age, I'm still working at it. No, I think what we're talking about is a response to this whole thing of adolescence and challenging the notion of adolescence, that it's in some way a kind of a Western concept. That, you have this period when you're a teenager where you can get up to all sorts of nonsense, and we say, it's fine because you're a teenager, you're in this period of adolescence. And then people talk about hormones and talk about all sorts of stuff, mixed messages, and, you're supposed to be in this state of confusion. I think that's all socially constructed and culturally constructed. And as people of African descent, when we look to history and culture for examples of that, we don't find that. What we find is a clear demarcation and change that takes place after a period of intense training or education, transition, ceremony, ritual, after which you are an adult.
Right.
And there is the death of a stage and the birth of another stage, and the awkwardness in between is managed as the child, together with other young people, would have been taken away from the village, from the community, and put through that process that would have been culturally informed. And then when that work has taken place, the group then is reintegrated back, and the community is enriched with new adults.
Yeah. Wow. If you thought we were going to start off light, you misunderstood.
Yeah, we're going in, right? We're going in. We're going in. That was lightweight. That was like, we ain't started yet.
We're not started. So when Pablo talks about kind of removing the child from their family, from their family home, I guess, and taking them into an arena where they can experience lessons and challenges, that was a big part of the program at Origin. And it's a highly organized and highly intellectual arena when you walk into this space, and you have to be prepared to learn and to be challenged. I think challenge is a really big word for what Origin does. But you say it's been happening for 20 years.
20 years.
20 years.
This is its 20th year.
Okay, so 20 years ago, where do you find the energy or the impetus to start that? Because that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work.
Yeah, it was a massive commitment.
Where does that come from?
Well, it didn't come out of thin air. I think the last bus stop, let's say, before the birth of Origin, is the work that took place at New Initiatives. So we're talking about 1980s, late 1980s, early 1990s, and what was happening in the black community and in British society at that time. So, very different to now, because I talk about that period as a period of the birth of the kind of African-centered Renaissance, and think it's a time where, all sorts of African-centered scholars, activists, historians, academics were grappling with massive questions, lots of stuff happening in the world. And a centre like this was the place. It's almost like the kind of African-centred HQ for like-minded people in this area.
Yeah.
And in fact, I say this area, I mean, what do we mean by that? People would come from all over London, definitely.
Yeah.
And then there would be times where people would be coming nationally to this place and internationally. So some of the stuff, some of the speakers and activists that we're talking about, historians and so on, that are based in some of the universities in America would actually come here and speak.
Yeah. And are we talking about Stockwell and Brixton? Or are we talking about this building, New Initiatives?
They would come to this building.
Right, okay.
This building. And and they would be very familiar. They'd be very familiar with the space, the culture. There's a shrine in the corner, there is very positive images sounds, smells. I mean, this isn't a space that you'll find a table tennis table and a pool table, and a Mars bar. Yeah. It's not that kind of quote unquote youth club.
Yeah.
And in fact, what happened to get to this point in answering your question, we had to take on many struggles to abandon those ideas that this is what's expected of a youth club, this is what's expected of a youth project. And we critiqued that and abandoned youth work. We abandoned youth work in place of rites of passage. And it meant that for the first time in my career at the time, I was able to challenge some of the expectations, the perceptions of what good work is, because we were now defining it for ourselves. Mm-hmm. That's a very powerful position to be in, to be talking from a position of cultural and political strength and spiritual strength, as opposed to delivering on what we learned in college. That's very different. We're now the teachers.
Right.
We're now the intellectuals. We're now the cultural ambassadors. We are driving this. And if that causes others awkwardness as they try to catch up with where we're at, well, that's your issue.
Yeah.
Better get on the bus and find out what the hell this is about, because we're going.
Did you always know that this is the work that you would be driving towards as one of the bus drivers?
I knew this was going to be one of those profound, deep interviews. It was never going to be, so what'd you do over the weekend? It's just never going to be that. Yes, in answer.
That's because I know who I'm talking to.
Yeah, man.
You never let me get away with, with any of them kind of questions.
And you bring it out. So, and there is something in that, the energy and the spirituality of our relationship, which goes back now many years. In answer to your question, the question is yes. Mm. As early as I can remember, my memory goes back to childhood now. Race and issues of equality and injustice have always been part of my thinking. I don't know where that came from.
Yeah.
I don't know. I certainly wasn't instructed. It's something I think I came with. Mm-hmm. As I opened my eyes and looked around, I saw race, I saw injustice, I saw inequality. And I was very aware of it. I didn't have the language for it, but I was very aware of it. And so as time went on, you go to school, you go to college, you go to university or whatever, and you go through these growth spurts. I think what has happened is that there's just been an alignment of purpose. So Origin and the work around African-centered rites of passage is me delivering on my purpose.
Okay.
I don't have any hesitation in talking in those terms. This isn't youth work. It isn't work. It's not a vocation. It's not a job. Mm. It's something that I came here to do. Mm. And that's how it's managed to sustain all of the political changes, the lack of resources, the lack of funding, right? How have we managed to do this? And all of these other projects have kind of come and gone over the years. Yeah. And we have just gone from strength to tremendous strength. Mm. And it's because it's not relying upon any of those impetuses and those inputs. It's relying on us.
Alongside all of the work that you do, you still got real life to manage and your own families. And I feel like a lot of sometimes a hole that this initiative can fill for some of the young people that come and experience it is they might have maybe absent family members, or they might be experiencing something here that they don't have at home, or a role model. I wanted to ask you, what's it like for you being a father and a son, and then coming into this space? Like, what is life for you as a father and a son? That's the question.
Sure. Well, when I reflect, there's a few answers to it. One is that this is what I believe I came to do, and there's more to be done. So I'm not ready to push up no daisies just yet. But this is what I believe I came to do. It's the kind of stuff that you do where hours and hours pass, days and days pass, and you have no sense of time. You're just in it.
Yeah.
And we know when we know what that is. That isn't about watching the clock. That's about saying we don't have enough time. you know, and your life is just full and rich like that. So we're just fully immersed, you know. But there is the truth in this, is that I think one of the things with myself, certainly, but when I think about other activists, community activists, when we have given so much to the community, sometimes you can get the balance wrong, and the family is suffering as a consequence of where you're placing all your time and all your energy.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time to realize that there's a balance that needs to be struck. And most of the time, our families are having difficulty with the fact that, you know, you may not be around. So there's a contradiction sometimes that I've seen, without mentioning any names or anything, but, you know, great, powerful contributors to community life don't necessarily have great family life.
Right.
But where there is that balance, there's a kind of whole and completeness.
Yeah.
And I think it's also fair to say that when we're talking about purpose, that you know when purpose is happening because it's almost like, you know, like the Ready Brick advert, you just glow in it, you know. But then there's a point where, and certainly when I look back now over all of the years, I know when the work has not been done. It's not that the work's been done, but moves into another stage. And it's consistent with this concept of rites of passage, because what's happened with me over the time is that I've grown from being a young adult, and I'm approaching eldership now. And so this concept of rites of passage isn't specifically, you know, it's not just for young people. We're all in a process of becoming. And so the bit that I'm at now is about legacy, is about wisdom, it's about passing on resource, it's about handover. And that's not handing over to a point of not participating, but it's about handing over to a point of taking on a new role. Because if we've done our work well, those that you've been working with are also growing into who they are. So it's organic. And eventually, of course, just like others have come before us, without sounding morbid here, but we transition and we move on and we become ancestors. And as we become ancestors, we must celebrate that as much as we do celebrate birth. And it's organic.
I mean, we're already talking about it. Because the breadth of this conversation, I feel like, has already approached it, and you've talked about legacy, and you've talked about handing things over, and you've talked about it being your purpose. So therefore addressing the idea of this podcast, and, you know, the definition of accountability would be the fact or condition of being accountable, and talking about responsibility. And we've already gone there. But when you hear the word accountability, what does it trigger in you? What does it make you think?
First and foremost, it triggers your own sense of morality, your own sense of you know, your own drivers, your own sense of right and wrong. So accountability for me is, am I doing what I know to be right? Then there's accountable to others. And that's where we're talking about the people that you journey with and the people that you go to for advice and guidance. We have here gone to elders for advice and guidance, and there are times when you feel like you don't have the answers. And at this point, you must have another resource. It's almost like another gear in your car. You know, you're from first gear, you're going to second gear, you're going to third gear, you still ain't got the thing. Right? We're not, you know that the car's not moving in the way it's supposed to be moving. So there's another gear. And that gear is a spiritual gear. It's about knowing that the set of challenges that you're facing is part of the experience that you're supposed to face, and you will continue to experience this and until you change something, until you do something differently. And that doing something differently might mean, instead of thinking, you now have to listen, and you have to wait.
Okay.
You have to wait, because what you're waiting for is the answers that you don't have. And you have to find quiet space, you have to meditate, you have to go in.
All right.
To go in. I mean, there's no It's no coincidence when you go to some of the religious texts and they talk about, 40 days and 40 nights and what have you, and then coming out elevated and illuminated, with new knowledge and new purpose. You have to go, you have to cut out the time and cut out the noise to find what it is that needs to be done.
That leads perfectly onto what I wanted to ask you next, which is, what are your practices when you're about to don your spiritual gear? What do you do in life that keeps you elastic, keeps you alive?
There are things that I do as part of my practice, my daily routines, and that might include anything from how you get up in the morning to, having your shower and what clothes you put on, what colors you put on, how you adorn yourself, how you step out your house, all of these, how you prepare yourself for the world. All of these things is preparation for what you're about to do. So there's all of that. But really interesting of late, that we've just finished this London to Paris bike ride. And I didn't know that was going to be another spiritual experience. Uh-huh. I thought it was, going to be an ordeal, a major challenge, but we as men, we're going to just man it out and get to Paris. And, but I didn't realize it was going to be spiritual. And what I got to discover was when a group of brothers are going on such a long journey, there are these moments where it's like hilarious and funny and, belly laughing on a bike. And you just, it's just amazing. And then there are other moments where it's just quiet. It's silent. And you're just in one long line with, a few inches between you and the person in front and the person behind. And there is a kind of a unity and a oneness, because we're all in our uniform, we're all on our bikes, and we're cycling to a rhythm, and we're cycling to a pattern, and we're creating a sound. It might be a sound through the air. Yeah. The machines that we're on are making a sound. We're in unity. And there's something really magical about that. There was one time we got to Brighton, for example, and we had to get to New Haven. And this stretch along the coast didn't have any traffic. It was actually, immediately to our right was the sea. And we were riding, and we were a little bit late for the ferry, and we were off, and we had to ride fast. And this is after getting to Brighton. Yeah. So that ain't no joke, right? So, but we're doing this, right? We have to get to, but otherwise we'll miss the ferry. Yeah. And we're on it, and we picked the game up, and then there was a guy that was flying some kind of glider, right? And he came over the top of our heads, almost as if he was guiding us to the place. Yes. And it was just a moment. Yeah. And I think Tokes must have said something like, what the hell? I'm just looking at this guy on a glider, right? And we just had these moments together. Everybody was one as a team, but also one within themselves. Yeah. Because each person has got their own story, has got their own drama, has got their own issues. Mm-hmm. And so those quiet moments as men, as we're going along this trip together, going along this journey together, those quiet moments were moments where not only were we physically exerting ourselves, but it was also creating a space for us to listen to ourselves as well. Yeah. It was beautiful.
That is beautiful. The imagery there with the glider and the bike. Oh man,
it was a beautiful sunny day.
Was it a golden thread moment? We talked about this idea of the golden thread earlier on, and we were talking about things that align our lives and our journeys. And I expressed mine as being almost connecting collaborators and influences and positive people in my life. And I feel like a lot of the creativity and the journeys that I go on as a person are connected through this golden thread. Now, Pablo might have a different interpretation of the golden thread, but that was kind of evocative for me when you were just talking about the line that you guys are in between London and Paris, going forwards as one, but as a team at the same time.
Well, there were moments when we weren't one. We were just a bunch of guys that were all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't uniform, and it wasn't unified, and it was clunky. It was erratic. It was, it was awkward, and I don't know. You've got to stop at traffic lights, and we are not one. It became one.
Yeah.
And it became one thing as opposed to lots of things, But in terms of like golden thread, coming back to that point, the golden thread for me was that within the team, there are some incredible individuals, and we've always had the potential to go deeper into our relationship. So we've never been superficial, but then there's levels, right? What has happened during the bike ride and since the bike ride is that the quality of our relationships have got very, very meaningful.
Yeah.
Very meaningful. I mean, we talk about things now that we wouldn't normally have spoken about.
Okay.
We share with each other aspects of our life that we would not normally share with each other.
Yeah.
So there's one thing about coming and being a facilitator on a program and getting a brotherhood out of that.
Yeah.
But there's something quite different when you bring yourself to the party.
Yeah.
And you're actually part of this. You're not just supporting it, you're also benefiting from it. You're giving and receiving. And what has happened, the quality of the relationships amongst the brotherhood is at an all-time high.
And that's through the practice of cycling.
Through the practice of cycling, yeah. So what I'm saying is that, when we talk about African-centered rites of passage, that all sounds very, all very red, gold and green, right? But, and cycling doesn't immediately come to mind.
100%.
But it isn't about the activity.
Yeah.
It's about the quality of the relationships and creating the opportunity for those meaningful moments.
Yeah, that's so important. That's so
And
important.
it could be anything. We could be painting.
Yeah. Yeah.
We could be doing anything. It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
This moment right now, you and I.
Yeah.
It's a quality moment.
Yeah.
With microphones and laptops, right? When you think about spirituality, you don't think about electronics and engineering that went into creating a Mac.
Right.
But it's a vehicle through which we have this moment.
1,000%. Through learning to record conversation and through learning to have conversation, learning to be able to talk to people in this format and this arena, I feel like I'm finding similar benefits of learning and diversifying the way that I express myself. And I'm really glad that we're able to have this conversation.
Yeah.
As you said, through this technology and talk about the things that we've been talking about, which might not necessarily always fit in with this kind of medium in the first place. There's this idea of a time capsule. I want to know if there is an item or an idea or any kind of entity that you'd want to put inside of this time capsule for someone to dig up in, say, 500 years or 1,000 years.
There's so many things that come to mind. There are so many things that come to mind. Like, so for example, immediately outside of this window to my left, there's a tree.
Okay.
And we planted that tree to the memory of one of the young men that we were working with who lost his life. His name was Dale, and he was also my cousin. I'd want to put that in there. I'd want to put, if not the tree, I want to put the idea.
A bigger hole.
Yeah, I would like to put the idea of remembrance, of acknowledgement, of out of a tragedy, we done what we could do to create life.
Yeah,
which was the planting of a tree.
Yeah.
Right. So there's that. There's the concept of earth, fire, water, and air, and what those elements represent. I'd want that idea, and as that kind of pulls together and creates a program, I'd like that idea, for people to be able to learn from and improve upon, possibly going forward. Then that's great. I think
some kind of representation of those elements.
Yeah, the representation of the elements, but. Yeah. I think there's, at the end of an Origin graduation, there's the ceremony, and the ceremony includes the burning of some items or some paper that have people's affirmations about how they wish to live their lives going forward. And the collection of those ashes goes into an urn, goes into a container. And every generation of origin cohort that comes through the program add their ashes to the ashes that's already in that's been collected.
Yeah.
I think it would be nice for 20 years of origin represented by way of that urn to be pulled up in many years to come.
Yeah.
For people to say, what the hell were they doing here? What the hell is this? And it might need an explanation. Otherwise, they might actually think it's some human remains. Right? We weren't that deep.
Yeah.
But just the idea around each generation building upon those that came before. Yeah. And that we will, and that creates a bond, it creates a brotherhood, and that we're all in that now. Although we've come through at these different generations, we're actually all in it together.
Some years ago, you encouraged me to make contact with my father after years of absence. And it took me a long time.
I remember.
It took me a long time to do it. It took me a long time to process it and to do it. And I did it. And when I did it, it didn't necessarily go the way I thought it would. But I did it anyway. And then it took me another bunch of time to be able to develop those thoughts further and process that. And very soon I'm going to go and meet him for the final time. And I wanted to thank you for your advice and being a positive force in my life, and being able to have these types of conversations with me. Some of them should be recorded, some of them shouldn't. And I'm really glad that we got to record this one and talk more about the work that you do and the work that is benefiting myself and the community and people that have come through this space that we're in.
If we're winding up and tying up, I think I'd want to also acknowledge the roles of Tokumbo and Adisa, the founder members, and the brotherhood as a whole. There are far too many of them to mention now. That's made it all possible, because I think it's fair to say that I've had an important role in all of this, but it could not have been done by any individual. So that's part of what needs to be said. And then the group Origin fits within the kind of New Initiatives family, alongside a KUA that works with young women. So the whole thing needs acknowledging as we stand on the shoulders of those that have come before, and we, continue the great work that needs to be done. It's never going to be easy. It's certainly a challenge, but the relationships that we establish in working around rites of passage are lifelong. Lots of people go through programs and you never see them again. We are building family and community. So that is what we've had to do. That is the response to the colonial, neo-colonial enslavement, fragmentation that's taken place. The challenge and the task that we were set as Africans is to rebuild, and so that's what we've been trying to do. So there's a context there that we need to kind of just acknowledge. It's not a youth project. There's a whole movement here. In terms of going forward, I think I kind of touched upon it, I think, earlier, which is that if we've done our work well, the work lives on beyond us and through the people that we've reached. And so it is an absolute joy, honor, privilege to have you come back how many years later. I tell you this though, we saw you from day one. The group of facilitators are able to identify who's who very early on. You know, the people that we're going to struggle with, the people that get it straight away, the people that, in a sense, that came in, you know, already ready for something, you know. And you came ready for something. You didn't know what you was getting into, but you came open and ready. And so we have to acknowledge your mum, your family, your mum and your dad, because you wouldn't be here without them. Whether you're struggling with those relationships or not, you know, it's just an acknowledgement for life. And then there's all those important people that make it possible, that inform the character that we are and that we then play out through life. So we're only able to do the work that we do because we come in touch with wonderful spirits and brothers like yourself. And so it's a mutual exchange. I thank you. But I also thank you for being you, because you've also helped to strengthen us and helped to strengthen the group as a whole. So it's a oneness.
It's a oneness. Thank you, Brother Pablo.
My absolute pleasure.
Yes. All right. That was mad. Could you hear my brain exploding? I had to really focus in on not getting left behind during that conversation. Brother Pablo is so wise, and his spiritual ear is wide open, and he's not afraid to drop linguistic bombs. It's like interviewing Black Panther crossed with Morpheus and Uncle Phil. I came away thinking that although Pablo has always felt his calling to lead and support what he defines as his community, he's constantly uplifted and enriched by those that benefit, by his brothers and sisters and the power of ancestors. Despite this being a late addition to the accountability conversation, it might just be the episode that most clearly uncovers real-life meanings and applications of the word. If you want to hear more about the Origin program, check out originhq.wordpress.com. By the way, have you heard the updated Accountability Podcast playlist on Spotify? I really wanted to mention this in the interview, but forgot to say I first heard these mentors play Mos Def, Umi Says as they drove us around the UK on exciting, challenging adventures. They had this song on repeat, and not only did it soundtrack my adolescence, it introduced me to real hip-hop. If you've listened before, you'll know I want to check in with you about how that project is going. Have you been able to move it forwards? This episode was brought together quite quickly, but the series as a whole takes a lot of chipping away little bits at a time. So I want to wish you good luck and energy with getting on with whatever you choose to direct your creative time into. Thank you to Stoney Browder Jr. for original theme music. Thanks to Danny McIntyre Loveridge for live guitar. Thank you to Adam Dawson for lending me a second microphone. Thank you to Pablo for joining me in conversation. Thank you to Lorne Ashley for mixing support. This episode was recorded using Shure SM7B microphones through a UA Arrow interface and constructed in Ableton Live 10 intro. If you'd like to link up on socials about the podcast or any other projects, then you can find me on Instagram as Aaron of Kong. I'd love to know what you're working on. Peace.